Maybe that was the mistake to begin with. Maybe there's something older than and prior to the subject-object distinction. Maybe this notion that the world's over there and I'm over here was already part of the problem that got me into this. The notion that other people are over there and I'm over here, that again is part of the illusion. It's the world itself seems to be something that's there, and I seem to be something that's separate from it, but it's thought and reliance upon vision that really make that seem to be the case.
Okay. I just, I wanted to jump in at that point of your video because that very statement is like a point of contention, and I guess I can sprout, hopefully, that can source to a lot of my themes relative to you, and so let me see how I could start that. First of all, the very notion that you would say a reliance on sight to you, I mean, I'm supposing you're qualifying it to yourself, although I think that you read that from another author and that you adhere to that. It has become imbued in you as a type of dogmatism. You rely on this as a crucial tangent for certain arguments, and this is what I meant by you have to state something. You have to be dogmatic in order to have the next thought, the nounus verbus relationship. And I'm dogmatic towards that idea, right? But, okay, so the very notion that sight is the reliance on sight is somehow a guilty party to your seeing yourself as separate from the world, is by itself very interesting. That somebody would say, well, that is the reliance on the sight is guilty. And I think that this is somehow tied into your notion of words holding meaning in transcendence, like that a number two, there is no two and there's no platonic two, but there is the scratch two, and that's what I was getting at by, perhaps when we look at what it means to be human and what it is to speak, we must rely on a separation of ourselves relative to the world, an actual kind of a boiling down of objectivity of ourselves, not relative to the meaning of words, but relative to the syntax of words. Because fonts, right? Fonts, for example, let me just jump back here real quick. Here's two fonts, right? A few fonts. Okay, Wittgenstein and Derrida. I love this book. I thought it was really great. But my point about this is that the number two could be written in multivarious fonts, and to say that one cannot extract a meaning or a sense of, a Germanic feel in one, some location base, some landscape from which that font would derive. The very fact visually of a font showing up imbues so much meaning, right? It itself tells something, right? It says something about perhaps a location. It tells something about the world, and in my mind, this is a cohesion with the world. It's an interaction with the world. As a matter of fact, it's a visual tonality. In as much as you want to say that the auditory field sounds like it's internalized and it's happening at the same time as it is as the speaker, or however it is you're finding your connection with the world. I'm suggesting that the very fact that you believe that's how you interact with the world specifically, is probably similar to how other people, other professors, or other individuals who have followed a canonized reading list might feel themselves required to speak about such things. And in this same way, this is why I categorically, I mean, I'm not actually against, I try to pun and play against Heidegger's read of the living, right? Or that his distinctions are petty, right? And the reason I'm doing that is not anything having to do with Heidegger. All philosophers, all people make distinctions and differences. The reason why I do it is because he's such a focal point that you hold on to. And so, like, for example, somewhere along the line in the history of English or in the history of philosophical considerations, the difference between episteme and ontology came about. But what was it? Yeah, I mean, noumena and phenomena, Übermensch and human all too human. The distinctions that are inherited and considered then to be a part of the understanding. I mean, really, what would it mean for you to remove the all subsequent considerations from the word ontology? What would it mean to erase the very word ontology? And then what it would mean to erase different authors' considerations of things. The reason I suggest this as an exercise is because if you don't erase one, then you don't believe that the sign itself is in free play. Somehow it is captured within a canonized history. It is captured within the genre of the philosophical read itself. And because it's caught within a genre, it's caught within a scope. This is what I might say by a grand scope. And so being a professor, you have this grand historic scope and a reading list that you probably inherited from previous professors. The criticism is in how much of what it is you speak about are you bound to speak about because you have to adhere to what a previous author had said. And that this boundedness is not dissimilar to the boundedness of religious strata, of seeing, I guess you could say, cardinals, bishops, pope in the Catholic frame, or, bishops, Council of the 70, Council of the 12, and then the prophet or whatever in Mormonism, or however else these different, maybe Baptists are more flat because you got Bark Lords in the last video in sympathy with my argument about hierarchies talking like, well, look, I'm perhaps against the authorial hierarchies that are found within academia because they seem as if it might be a dog-eat-dog sort of approach to the top of the hill, and that you're like, well, do you want a representative democracy or a total democracy? What are you implying? Well, I do a video on chakras, and chakras in terms of symbol, I symbolize them in terms of pyramids and pointing down and pointing up. And the pointing down, you might say, is degenerate. It's nihilistic. It's derogatory. I call it emotive. The top one is inflationary. It's to get to the top of the game. So the question is, you say, well, I have this good life. I want this good life. I believe in the good life. Does that also include always like finding this disgust for the straggler, right? Because I'm like, why is it that Professor Anton sees sour grapes in people because they move slowly? Is he so bound within a way of being that he would like to have everybody agree with that the where you make a distinction, like, and that's what I meant. God, is he saying this guy is an ass because he's a straggler, or can he empathize with something that might be of a younger age? A different sort of process, finding oneself and one as distinct from their community at large and hence in contra to it? Or is it always just that sour grape? I mean, and so then this just kind of questions, what is it that people adhere to? And what is it that they aren't trying to drive forward in terms of policy and agreement? And I mean, granted, there's a huge reading list out there. I mean, there's bundles of things that people can read. It's, where are we in this? I don't know.